Hi everyone, so today we have here with us Mr. Olof Gränström. He is the project manager at Gapminder. He is a political scientist with a background as an educator. Mr. Gränström, welcome to the channel. How are you doing?
I'm glad to be here, or I'm at home, using the modern technology miracle called Skype.
Yeah, you're right. So, okay, I already had an interview with Fernanda Drummond from Gapminder as well. So with her, I talked a bit more, I centered the questions a bit more around the poorer countries. So with you, if you don't mind, I would like to talk more about the work Gapminder has been doing, but applied to the progress that we've been seeing occurring in the more developed countries, let's say. So, okay, to start off with, could you tell us a bit of the story behind Gapminder and its creator, Hans Rosling? Why did he start this organization?
Gapminder was founded, as you said, by Professor Hans Rosling, who was probably one of the most famous statisticians in the world without being a statistician. He was a medical doctor by profession, but he used a lot of statistics in his daily work. He got the idea to found Gapminder when he worked at KI, which is a medical teaching hospital in Sweden. And he had been abroad for many years working in rural Africa, and then he came back to Stockholm and was supposed to start teaching here at KI. And KI is one of the most prestigious universities in Sweden, so there are only top students there. And when he was starting to teach, he was like, "What can I teach these students? I don't know. They are top students, and I haven't been to Sweden for 20 years." So he did what most good teachers do when they really don't know the audience well. He asked a series of questions. Which country has this child mortality? And you got two alternatives. I think the first one was Sri Lanka and Turkey. And then 5 questions, 2 alternatives. And then when he noticed his students had more wrongs than they should by random, he kind of saw that there is not only lack of knowledge, there's actually a wrong knowledge, a non-updated worldview that will live with an old worldview. And then I think there was when he got the idea in the future to start Gapminder and start to work for a more fact-based worldview. He founded the actual Gapminder Foundation together with his son, Olof Rosling, and Ola's wife, Anna. And they brought different kinds of expertise into Gapminder. Hans was the statistician, the brilliant presenter. Ola was the data guy, both when it comes to working with big amounts of data, but also doing the actual coding. And Anna is the one that has done most of the work when it comes to the visual side. Without her, maybe the bubbles would have been in black and white. I don't know.
Right. So you collect a lot of data from many sources at Gapminder. What are your main sources that you use to collect data and to turn into visual data for people to better understand them?
I would say our main sources at the moment are the United Nations and World Bank. Those are our 2 biggest sources at the moment. And because we don't create our own data sets, we don't go out and do research to gather our own data. We just take the open data that actually exists and try to turn it into, this is open public data, and we try to turn it into more of a public knowledge, because the data is there, but people don't use it, people don't look at it.
Yeah, okay, so what is your specific job at Gapminder? I know that you're developing, for example, the Ignorance Project. So in what ways are you trying to educate people about global facts?
Oh, I think I'm a little bit the guy that does a little bit of everything at Gapminder. I would say my main focus is actually, as you said, developing the Ignorance Project and developing ignorance questions and finding what people don't know. But the other part of my job is to develop teaching material that can be used on university level and high school level mainly to give both students but particularly teachers an updated worldview. Because if teachers don't have an updated worldview, we will continue to see new generations with the skewed worldview. So we need to update the educational sector. I think that's very important. That is one of my main roles within Gapminder.
Mm-hmm.
So
Great.
we work with universities, we work with municipalities, we work with the school districts, cities that want to update their teachers' worldview.
Okay, great. So now to get into more specific questions about human development and world development that we've been seeing occurring for the last, let's say, 200 years. So would you say that perhaps one of the biggest propellers of human development that has been happening in the recent human history would be the Industrial Revolution?
In a way, that has been one of the main propellers. And when you talk about human development, it's important to understand that we have seen an extreme economic development the last 200 years, mainly driven by the Industrial Revolution and all the side effects the Industrial Revolution have had. And all that money that was created through this economic development, a lot of it actually did to develop our societies. We got better healthcare, better education, better medical facilities, and that has enriched people's lives and actually made us live longer lives. It has brought down child mortality. So the life expectancy has gone up dramatically in the last 200 years.
Mm-hmm. So the Industrial Revolution is more on the material side of things, right? In terms of the ideas that help the human development. Let's say we could go back to the ideas that come from the Enlightenment, like science and humanism and so on, right?
Yeah, but I would say that the money, the more materialistic side is important because it costs money to develop societies. You can't do that without money. So creating this wealth that the Industrial Revolution has helped us do has helped us develop our society. It's hard to say what comes first, but you can't. It's very hard to develop society without money. So the Industrial Revolution has been an important factor.
Yeah, and because the material side of things is so important. And this is perhaps a more sensitive question. What would you say the data tells us about what has been the best socioeconomic model that we've been experiencing with?
That's very hard, and one of the things that we at Gapminder is advocating is that when you don't know, you should be humble and actually admit, I don't know. I'm not the best judge of saying what the social economic model is the best. I would say that everybody should look at the data. You should look at what countries has developed, in which historical periods, and make your own conclusion. Because there are so many factors. What you consider is the most important development. For one, I think bringing down child mortality, enriching people's lives, making them live longer lives by bringing down child mortality is very, very important. And that has happened in all countries in the world the last 200 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and I think one of the best and biggest developments we've been seeing in recent times is the fact that the number of children per couple around the world has been diminishing, has been decreasing. So just for people to understand it a bit better, to start off in the initial phase of the first industrial revolution. So we experienced the very big demographic explosion because people used to have 5-6 children per couple on average, and so in the initial phase of the industrial revolution they were still having this number of children, but then they started noticing that fewer and fewer children died with time, and so eventually, and starting with the more industrialized and developed countries, we've seen a decrease in the number of children with time, and now it's around 2 or 2 point something children per couple in most of the world, right?
Yep, and I agree. That's one of the most important developments that has happened the last 200 years, and it's important to understand that we have had if you could call it a population explosion, but it has begun to stabilize because, as you said, 200 years ago, women had on average 6 children per woman, and 4 of them died. That kept population growth in a balance. So we had a slight population growth, but it was not very fast because death kept the population in check. Then, through modern societies and more developed societies, better healthcare, better access to food, better access to education, children started to survive, and that was caused the great population growth. But today, through now that most children actually survive, now that child mortality is around slightly above 40 children out of 1,000 born die before the age of 5, and it has gone down from 500 out of 1,000 born in the beginning of the 19th century. Now, in almost every country on the world, women and families choose to have fewer children, and this seems to happen in every country. It doesn't matter what religion or culture or where it is geographically. If children survive, if women have access to education, if we have access to healthcare, if we start to talk about family planning, the number of children per woman goes down. And there are very, very few countries on earth where the number of women of children, children per woman hasn't started going down. And they are mainly in the countries that are still in extreme poverty.
Right.
That still has a number of children per woman. So we solve the problem. If we bring the last countries out of poverty, extreme poverty, the number of children per woman will go down to around 2 children per woman, and then we will have a stable population. We are almost there. So population growth will probably stop around 2085, 2100.
Okay, exactly. Great. So, and another very good development we've had is the one related to longevity, because nowadays, and we can talk, perhaps we could focus on the time scale surrounding the increase in life expectancy for people, mainly in the more industrialized countries, because it was in a very short period of time that it doubled or even more than doubled for people in the more industrialized countries, right?
And today, actually, life expectancy is above 70 for the entire world. So I think people underestimate the life expectancy in most countries of the world. These are ones of our ignorance questions that we have in our test that you can do on our website. So people underestimate the life expectancy in many countries because we don't see how much these countries have developed. People underestimate life expectancies in countries like Bangladesh, Thailand, countries that are developing, countries that are developing their economy, that are developing their society. They have a life expectancy above 70.
Right. So, but I mean, in the more industrialized countries, from an historical perspective, the doubling of the life expectancy occurred in a very short period of time, right?
Yeah, mainly caused by better access to food, better sanitation, better water to drink that didn't give you diseases, better health care, and most of the increased life expectancy is caused by child mortality going down, but we are also getting a little bit older nowadays. Most has been caused by children surviving.
Okay, so and now again at the level of the industrialized countries, because I think that this is one of the ideas that people also get wrong, that is that it is not possible to, with time, produce lower levels of pollutants and to contribute less and less to pollution worldwide, and at the same time to have economic growth. People think that these two things can't go together, but that's not correct, right?
That's also a very hard question to answer. Is it correct or is it not correct? I can tell you a little story. I'm quite old, so I remember the ozone layer being depleted by us releasing freon gases. And when I was young, everybody was saying, people in the developing world, they can't have fridges because then the ozone layer will be depleted. But today, they have many people in China and India actually have access to fridges because we had a technical development, we had regulation that actually forbid the freon gases, and we replaced them with less harmful gases for the ozone layer. They were harmful in other ways, but they were not harmful for the ozone layer. So it's possible to have economic development and social development without increasing the level of pollution. But it's not easy, and you have to work with regulations, and you have to work with technical development. But I think there is a lot of hope, and just by the thought experiment, 100 years ago, the world leaders gathered in Paris, or they gathered in a castle outside of Paris, Versailles, and women were not allowed, and only Europeans were allowed, and this was after the First World War, and they divided the world between them. 100 years later, the world leaders gathered in Paris to sign the Paris Accord about the global warming and greenhouse gases. So we have come a long way. We are more aware of our world. There are still a lot of challenges when it comes to the environment, but we are more aware, and we actually care more, I think, because we know more, and I think it's possible to have economic growth. It has to be, because we have to have more economic growth. There are still places on Earth where we need a lot of more economic growth. There are still countries that are poor, and they need economic growth. So it has to be possible.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I already talked about war trends in the world with Fernando Drummond. With you, I would like to focus more on the rates of violence or the rates of violent crimes, because I mean we've been experiencing also a decreasing rate in violent crimes, right? Mainly in the more developed countries, more rapidly, but also throughout the world. And for example, things like homicides, even if when we turn on the TV, it's very usual to see things happening here and there, but I mean it's a bit exaggerated the way they put things, because violent crimes have been declining in number and in percentage over time, and now I'm still not talking. I'm still not including terrorist attacks and things like that. That would be another question. But could you please talk a bit about that?
And if you look at the historical trend, we used to kill each other in a lot more historically than we do today, especially if you look at it in a historical view, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. It's hard to have the exact numbers, because what is considered to be a crime, a murder, it varies over time, and people's will to actually report crimes varies. But you could be certain that the number of violent crimes has gone down the last 200 years. And yes, media report a lot about crime, and it's their job to report about what happens in the world and the current news that actually we want to see. But just because there are more reports today, don't mean there are more crimes. We have more media today. We have pod radio, we have alternative media, we have old media, new media. So there are so much reporting going on. That doesn't mean there are more violent crimes or more natural disasters was in depth. It's just that we see them way more than we used to do. And that might give the impression that there are more crimes today. And talking about crimes is very hard because there might be more crimes in a specific region or in a specific country. But on a global level, on a historical level, we used to be way more violent before. We used to kill each other way more than we do today.
Yeah, exactly. And another very specific trend is about terrorist attacks, because I mean nowadays, and with what we've seen happening in recent years in Europe and in the United States and so on, I mean people in what we call the first world get a bit worried about terrorist attacks, but in fact the damage they cause in terms of the number of deaths is not that important in comparison to other kinds of killers, right?
Yeah, we actually did a small study in Gapminder, where we took data from the burden of disease, which actually shows for people what people die from, and then we ran it against a lot of major media outlets, and the correlation what people report about, what gets reported and written about in the media, and what actually kills people is not. What people die of today is non-communicable diseases in level 4 countries like Sweden and Portugal, and they are not very dramatic, so people won't report about people dying from cardiovascular diseases or all the new versions of cancer that we are dying from, but they will report about the most dramatic events, and we need somebody to do that, but we should be aware that these are outliers in many ways. And consuming too much media might give you an over-dramatic worldview. So you should be careful about that. You should go and consume some statistics also, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So, and about another problem, and this I think is really a problem by itself, that is what we've been seeing happening in terms of the increase in economic inequality. Because I mean, there, particularly in the more developed countries, that there has been a small percentage of people that have been accumulating more and more capital, and people on the one hand get a bit worried about what could happen in the future if this trend continues, and I've been listening to a lot of people talking about that. But on the other hand, shouldn't we also take into consideration the fact that even if a small number of people gets a larger percentage of the pie, if the pie keeps increasing and the other people also, even if they keep the percentage that they have of that pie, but they still get more of it because the pie enlarges. So what I want to ask you is that if you think that economic inequality is really that important, or if the vast majority of people gets access to goods and services that allow them to have a good life, if we shouldn't worry that much about that.
That's also a hard question, and because it also we at Gapminder generally speak about the global level. And at global level, people living in extreme poverty has actually halved. The proportion of people living in extreme poverty has halved the last 20 years. This is great development. This is a trend that has happened at the same time as the trend you were speaking about, that a few really rich people has accumulated more wealth than before. So I think it's one of the things that is important here is to be able to have two perspectives at the same time. Yes, there are some people in the world, the really rich are getting richer, but the number of people living in extreme poverty is also decreasing. On a global level, that is two things you need to understand. And what I focus on, what we at Gapminder focus on, they are the people living in extreme poverty, because a lot of the problems that still exist in the world is because we still have people living in extreme poverty, and they are the ones that are suffering. Then I'm not saying that increased inequalities in a society might be harmful for that society, if the middle class goes without work, it might be harmful for that society. But on a global level, you can know that some people are accumulated a lot of bigger proportion of the riches, but you should also know that the number of people living, the amount of people living in extreme poverty is decreasing. So you should be able to have these two perspectives at the same time and be happy about one and perhaps be worried about the other one. We at Gapminder focus on the people that the proportion of people living in extreme poverty is decreasing because we think that is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And
please continue.
Yeah, this is a very hard question to answer because yes, there are dangers with an increased income inequality in a country. There are a lot of examples about that. But if you only look at those examples, you might miss that we are decreasing extreme poverty in the world. And that might be because most countries that are talking about the increased inequality don't have any experience of extreme poverty. They have never seen it. It's seldom shown on TV because these are people living in such horrible ways, lives that we can't. It's hard to imagine living life without access to food, without access to proper housing, without access to education, without access to water that doesn't make you sick. So maybe I think it's important to have both perspectives, and I think the perspective that extreme poverty is decreasing is one that sometimes gets forgotten, and a lot of people don't know about that, and that is one of the things that we at Gapminder work with to try to get people more aware of. A global extreme poverty is decreasing because that's a major achievement for humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so about that, one thing that I would also like to ask you is that, so if the number of people living in extreme poverty has been declining a lot, and according to the projections we expect to reduce it to zero, at least the number of people in extreme poverty by 2030 or something like that.
Global goal.
Sorry?
That's the global goal. That's the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal #1.
Yes, and so we have those data, and then also the medium class in the Asian countries has been increasing the number of people in that class. So if you compute those data all together, then could we really say that in economic inequality in a worldwide perspective has been increasing? Because it doesn't seem so.
I haven't looked at it on a world level like that. I know it has been increasing in some countries.
Mm-hmm.
So for some people, it's a very close question, and I don't want to relativize their experience of it.
Yes.
But I think it's also important to have the global perspective where we see people moving out of extreme poverty. We see a lot of people getting access to basic global, some kind of basic, living on a basic global middle class where we have access to fulfilling your basic needs. I think that's a very, very important perspective. And I don't want to relativize those people that feel that they live in a society with increased income inequalities, because it happens on a regional and a national and on a local level. So it's a relevant question, but on a global level, we want to focus on the achievement, the improvement of moving people out of extreme poverty. And I hope more people will focus on that, because the last 800 million, 700 million people living in extreme poverty won't be as easy as the first ones. Because now we're talking about countries that are fragile states, or many of them are war-torn states. They're not part of a global economy. There's no state, so they won't be as easy, and they will need a lot of work actually help these lost people out of extreme poverty. That's what I want people to see, that we have come far, but there's still a bit of work to do.
Exactly. And so, what are the other impressive findings in terms of human development for the last 200 years, thanks to industrialization and perhaps science as well, that you think people should know about?
I think it's one of the things is that 9 out of 10 children today actually get to go to school. 9 out of 10 children actually get to go to primary school, 4 years of schooling, where they should learn how to read, write, do basic math. I think that's a very important achievement to be aware of. I think it's an important achievement to be aware of when it comes to understanding the world. Maybe it's investing in other countries, that you actually know that most people today in the world are educated. I think that's a very important thing to understand. I think it's an important thing to understand that basic healthcare in the form of vaccinations today reach over 80% of our population. And that has been mainly caused by finance. A lot of it has been financed by aid money. And I think it's important to know that aid sometimes works. Why should we continue with it when we don't believe it works? We need to be able to see this actually works. We fought to eradicate polio. Polio is not completely eradicated yet, but it might be eradicated in just coming years. That's a great achievement for humanity. Today, over 80% of all children are vaccinated against the measles, one of the historically large child killers. I think that's a great achievement that we should be aware of.
Okay, and so since you now talked about foreign aid policy, would you say that one of the biggest contributors to development around the world in the last few decades has been monetary aid coming from more developed countries to the less developed countries?
One of the main. I think it's important when it comes to actually giving people access to vaccination, but I haven't seen that many good studies done on what has been the main contribution to the global development the last 20 years. Being part of the global economy is also very important. Being able to import and export your goods and being part of the global market is also very, very important. I think.
Yeah, because when the countries are included in this global market, what we tend to see is if even the richer countries grow, the less richer ones also tend to grow with them, right? Because they have access to those markets.
It doesn't come without problems. Some of these factories in level 2 and level 3 countries, the workers are living in horrid conditions. But you should also be aware of it has helped these countries to develop, not without problems, because there are no solutions that leads to further problems. We should be aware of that. Sometimes when you solve a problem, there will be almost always another problem.
And and since you also work on educating people, would you say that one of the other big propellers of human development and progress is education, and for people and for the vast majority of the human population to have access to good education?
Yes, I think that's important to bring down child mortality. That's important for entrepreneurship. That's important for financial growth. That's important for developing the societies. It's so hard getting information out in a society where people can't read and write. It's hard to get even information about basic hygiene if people can't read and write. So I think education is very, very important. And I don't think education will become less important.
Okay, so Mr. Gränström, would you like to leave any final remarks about what we've been talking here about today, so just for people to know perhaps a bit more about what you might be working on at Gapminder or things like that?
We at Gapminder, we are a Swedish foundation, and we work mainly with giving people a fact-based worldview. We don't want to solve any of your problems. We don't, because we think that people are fully capable of doing their own analysis, solving their own problems. We just want them to do it based on facts and not only on opinions, ideas, and what you think. If you want to know more, you can go to our website. If I would give one advice to your listeners, it would be to be humble. Because when you look at the world today, there are data for so many things. There are so many things you can know about the world, but we as human beings, we can't know everything. That's impossible. Our brain has a very hard time dealing with hundreds of thousands of data points that you can't find out. So before you take a decision or formulate an opinion, slow down your thinking and say, do I really know this, or do I just think I know this? Is it based on facts or a feeling I have? And if it's based on a feeling, go and check it out before you make an opinion, before you make a decision. I think that's an important advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a really good note to end on. So, Mr. Gränström, I would really like to thank you for taking a bit of your time to being here with us today. And I hope you keep up with the good work at Gapminder, because I think you're doing an excellent job there, and it's an organization which I admire a lot.
Thank you, and it was really fun talking to you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
If you appreciate my work, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/thedissenter. Thank you.